Hey y'all, welcome to Energy and Ecosystem. That's a topic, or a central question is, how does energy move through an ecosystem? I will have a secondary set of notes. These notes have been done by Miss Ranieri, and she goes through writing out the notes and showing you a proper style how to write your Cornell notes. I I'm just going to take advantage of that. I will post those as well. So if you want to watch her take notes through this, it might help some of those who struggle knowing what to write down or deciding what to write down and how to organize them. So I'm going to post those as well, and I'll denote that in the packet. But I'm just going to go through my regular set of notes, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to define as ecosystem, I've done this in class. I've talked about it when we talk about homeostasis in the ecosystem. We talked a little bit about it last class, but it can be defined as all the biotic and abiotic things within a specific area that work together to make it thrive. So remember that biotic is all the living things, and even the dead tree here is biotic, right? But remember, it's living or once living. And then all the abiotic would be the water, the temperature of the water, any rocks that are around here, the temperature of the atmosphere, how much rain it gets. Those types of things are biotic. So remember, and I think you have studied photosynthesis in the past, that all living things depend on energy, right? And the flow of energy. Obviously, we initially get it from the sun, but then the plants convert it to an energy that we can use, and then that supports all other organisms. But remember, 98% comes from the sun. There's a small percentage that comes from the vents in the ocean. There's actually bacteria that they're called chemosynthetic organisms, and they can take sulfur and other chemicals and convert it into a form of energy. We're going to talk about the first law of thermodynamics, and later we'll talk a little bit about the second law. But the first law states that energy can't be created nor can it be destroyed. And then the same thing, sort of get that intertwined with matter. I know that you've heard about matter cannot be created or destroyed, but it goes the same with energy. The energy, yes, it's created in the sun with nuclear fusion in a sense, but once that energy is gone, we can't, it's gone. We can't ever get it back. So it's only transferred from one organism to another, and it flows one way. We talked about the food chain, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The first law of thermodynamics is also known as the law of conservation of energy. Okay, so now you're going to draw a big triangle on your notebook paper. It could, take up half the page. It's not, you're going to do a lot of writing on it. So, and coloring and things like that, and writing notations on it. So it can be relatively large. You can also do multiple if you want, but you'll get an idea as we go through the notes. All right, so this is a food pyramid or an energy pyramid, more of an energy pyramid. Food pyramids are a little different. So an energy pyramid, and then we're going to lay these out so the organisms are organized based on their type of consumption. The different levels of consumption are called trophic levels. Trophic comes from the word nutrition, or means the word nutrition. So it's a nutrition level. And then again, we're going to call this an energy pyramid. All right, so we're going to start off with producers. They're the base of our energy pyramid, right? They're trophic level number one. They are autotrophs. Remember, auto means self, and remember, troph means nutrition. So they get their own nutrition. So they're going to get it primarily from the sun. They're going to get their nutrition from the sun, right? Or their energy. All right. They absorb the light energy from the sun and convert it into sugars through the process of photosynthesis, right? And when we talk about energy, we're talking about the energy that is trapped in the bonds of molecules, right? When we takes energy to put a molecule together, and it releases energy when it's broken, right? So that's how we get our energy. So as we go forward, remember that everything above the producers are going to get their energy from them, right? So even the guys way up here, initially the energy is going to start at the producers. So these guys are autotrophs. The primary consumers are going to be heterotrophs, right? So we call them herbivores, or and it'll get a little bit more complicated. And I'll talk about it, but these can sort of mix around. But anyway, these, for the most part, primary consumers are herbivores, obviously, right? Because they're just going to eat plants, right? Things like cows and deer, or plants or insects, things like that. Those are herbivores, and they're only going to eat plants, right? So we're at trophic level number 2, trophic level number 1, trophic level number 2. They are going to get all their energy from consuming the producers. And it says sugar molecules because essentially that's what we're eating things for, are the molecules that are stored in complex sugars. Okay, so the next one is heterotrophs. Okay, well, the next one is secondary consumers, and they are also heterotrophs. Right, we're at trophic level number 3. These are primarily carnivores, right? If we're going to go straight up, these guys are going to be eating the primary consumers, but we know in reality that's not always the case, right? So there are some secondary consumers that also eat producers, right? So those are going to be omnivores. But if this guy only eats, meat, he's going to be a carnivore, right? So we have secondary consumers, heterotrophs, and these are secondary consumers, primary consumer, secondary, okay? And the last is tertiary, or third level consumers, but it is trophic level number 4, all right, trophic level number 4. So tertiary consumers are the 4th trophic level. They are also called top carnivores. They get their energy from consuming other animals, and they, again, are called heterotrophs. All right, so this is our food chain, right? So we have our producer and the flow of energy. We talked about that, represents the arrows, right? So when this primary consumer eats the producer, the energy from the producer goes to the primary consumer, right? When this secondary consumer eats a primary consumer, the energy flows from primary consumer to secondary consumer. And lastly, the tertiary consumer, when it eats the secondary consumer, the flow of energy goes from the secondary consumer to the tertiary consumer, right? So that is our little food chain, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. All right, so since not all energy is moved up to the pyramid, and that's what we call the 10% rule, right? So only 10% of the energy that's available down here in the producers is available for the primary consumers. 10% of that energy is available for the secondary consumers, and 10% of that energy is for the tertiary consumers, right? So that is the limitation of energy flow. Not all of it gets passed up, right? But remember that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So where does that other 90% go? Okay, so 90% is lost, mostly due to heat. Okay, so if we're going to highlight something or asterisk something, organisms lose energy mostly as heat, right? Secondary reasons is, one, that it needs a small amount to live, right? So going through cellular processes. You learned about photosynthesis maybe before. That takes energy. And so where does that energy come from? Well, some of the energy that they consume, or they get, right, that they convert from the sun, right? Primary consumers, they have to digest food, they have a heartbeat, they have to move muscles, they have to, they need their own cellular processes for different things. And so some of that energy is used for that. And then lastly, if you think about it, there's a lot of producers. These primary consumers can't eat all the producers are out there. I mean, that would be um, detrimental to everything, right? So we need to, there can't be as many primary consumers that can eat all the producers, right? That will eventually run out of energy. So that it would be another reason why only 10% gets passed on. Right. So one of the things, whoops, sorry. Um, um, we're not really going to I don't talk about it a lot, but the second law is that of thermodynamics is energy decreases in quality as it's used. So high quality energy like sugars can turn into this low quality energy. I changed the kilocalories, but I didn't put kilocalories here. These are just units of energy. I didn't see that here. So, this would be 9,000 kilocalories being lost. So joules we usually use like in chemistry and physics. Kilocalories we use in biology. So I apologize for that. So anyway, so as I was saying, that this quality this heat, this energy that is lost as heat, this is what we call a lower quality because it cannot be reused again, right? Once it escapes into the atmosphere, right, we have a temperature, we cannot reuse it to fuel our body, right? It gets lost as heat and we'll never be able to capture that energy. So that's what we call low quality. All right, so again, here's an example of um, a food pyramid or a energy pyramid where we have our light energy coming into the producers, the consumers eating it, the producers, and so on and so forth. We have heat lost, and then we have 10% of the energy that gets passed on. We're going to talk about decomposers in our next slide. Okay, so I don't know what happened to my decomposers. Oh, so that was after this slide. Okay, so I'm sorry. So that's okay. So we talked about energy being lost, and we can always add decomposers. And I apologize for missing this slide. So the decomposers are found at all levels. So anything that dies and is found, whatever on the side of a mountain or wherever, we're going to have bacteria. We're going to have other organisms that, fungi. We're going to have all these different types of things that decompose organisms. And one, they're going to get that energy from it. So it's sort of, I wouldn't really say that it's 10% of the energy because usually the decomposers don't need a lot of energy, but there's a lot of them. And then two, their main goal is to recycle the nutrients such as nitrogen and carbon and phosphorus and all these nutrients that are important for life, to put those back into the soil so the plants can reuse them. So that's their primary responsibility. When we talk about heat or energy transfer, we don't necessarily include decomposers as a percentage. I just know that that's where they get their energy from, is the decomposing all these organisms. Okay, so I'll go back. I apologize for missing that. So, okay, so we did talk about the decomposers, right? So again, I wouldn't put a percentage on the amount of energy that the decomposers get. All right, so when we're thinking about quantity, right? Well, sort of not quantity, but the mass of this energy pyramid, right? We talk about what we call biomass. What we call biomass is how much weight or how much mass is in each of these levels, these trophic levels, right? So, there's a bunch of different ways that we can measure these, and the units for the most part are unimportant in our class. We're not going to get specific on units, but you can see that we here is measured by grams per space or area, right? That's what meters squared, right? So you can talk about a park that is 10 kilometers squared. So, right, so you have 10 kilometers on each side, right? So a space of 10 meters, which is pretty big. I mean, that's 6 miles. And so it's a pretty big area, right? So within that, space, there'd be, a whole mass of trees, right? Let's say, we're throwing a number out here, 10 million kilograms of trees. So that's a lot, right? That's a big mass, right? But remember that mass doesn't equal number of organisms, right? Because we can have, one tree, right, with many, many leaves, but there's going to be a lot more insects. However, the mass of these primary consumers has to be smaller than the producers, right? Because they're just so going to be, um, they're so much smaller, and they're, so we can't really equate mass with the number of organisms, okay? And then, one mule weighs 90 kilograms. And so that's really what we're trying to get over, is that we're talking about mass and not number. All right. So when we talk about the pyramid of biomass, you can see that we're going to have a lot more photosynthetic organisms in the bottom, because they have to supply all the energy for the second trophic level, right? But there's going to be more organisms here that support the energy needs of this third trophic level. And again, there's going to be more organisms here that support the fewer organisms in here, because of the energy transfer. Is that there's going to be so much less energy available at each trophic level, the number of organisms that can support is going to be less, right? And then this is the same deal that we were talking about. Since energy is lost at every level, the amount of organisms that has to decrease. Well, not only the amount, but the biomass, right? The mass of the organisms has to decrease. So there's going to be less primary consumers and producers, and then so on and so forth, right? So if you think about eagles, they're only going to have, X amount of robins or whatever their food source is to survive off of. So it can't support a lot of eagles, right? Because because of all the energy loss. Okay, and here's another example of the 10% rule. All right, so food chains versus food webs. So food chain shows us energy flow from one organism to another. So we have grass, grasshopper, frog, python. Remember that the arrows represent the flow of energy, so it only goes this way. They're only limited to 4 to 5 trophic levels, right? Because if you're talking about the flow of energy, and because of the 10% rule, the energy gets lost as it goes further. So here we have so little energy to support any organisms past that, right? So let's say this tertiary consumer has a large territory of, let's say, 7 miles, right? Then that next organism has to have even a larger territory. And to find these few things that are flying around is just not viable, right? It's not possible. So usually it's 4 to 5 trophic levels, and then we just don't have enough energy to support anything above that. So now food webs, okay, so this is a food chain just showing one set of organisms. A food web is a bunch of food chains intermixed together, right? It's interconnected food chains. So, you could pull out an organism and you say krill, penguin, killer whale. Well, humans, I don't like this picture because humans aren't really in a food chain. It's sort of like we can cross that guy out. So, I just don't like it, right? So a real one would say, what is this? This is carnivorous plankton, right? So we have krill, plankton, fish, emperor penguin, leopard seal, killer whale, right? So it only would go maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one's 6, right? So, maybe because of those planktons eating this krill, So, but anyway, so the reason why, this is important to see okay, so there are organisms that are more important in this ecosystem. These guys are called keystone species. And they sort of, if you can look at them, like the squid would be a keystone species, because there's a lot of organisms that feed off of them, and there's a lot of organisms that it eats, right? So something that sort of binds the whole food web together. Like if you take it out, the food web would probably not do very well, right? So as opposed to, let's say, this crab eater seal, right? It doesn't really, the killer whale feeds off of other things, right? The krill is, eaten by other things. So if you take the crab eater seal, it'd be pretty, devastating. We really don't want to, do that, right? But it's not, the ecosystem is not going to be affected that much. Where if you take away the squid, you're going to have a lot of organisms that are affected. Okay, so homeostasis in an ecosystem as a wrap up. Remember, it's a balance of the ecosystem which sustains a stable living condition. It's maintained by both biotic and abiotic features that work together to make sure there is enough matter and energy within the ecosystem. We have stable patterns of birth and death, stable population sizes, and a consistent flow of matter and energy. And then there's a sudden growth or death of a single population. An unpredictable or inconsistent flow can lead to the death of it or extinction of populations, right? It upsets that balance of homeostasis. And again, as I sort of half joked before, is that humans are pretty good at disrupting these things. All right, so I think that's it for the notes. Again, as I mentioned before, I will be posting Miss Ranieri's notes. So if you want to, these are longer notes. It's a longer lecture or a presentation. I think lecture is such a negative word. We hear that and we like cringe, but it's a presentation. And she goes over writing these notes more efficiently. So if you need help writing notes, that would be good to watch her lecture as well. So this is late on Friday afternoon, so I hope you watch this during the weekend at some point. If not, I hope you have a great 3-day weekend, and we'll see you Tuesday and Wednesday.